Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. A quiet Tuscan night. A mother of two is there at bedtime and gone by morning. No footprints that hold. No camera that shows her leaving. No transactions. No phone pings. In small towns, disappearances echo, they don't fade. The question isn't where Roberta went. It's why every trace after midnight is missing. San Giuliano Terme, Pisa. Night of January 13th into the early hours of January 14th, 2012. The house is ordinary. The calendar for the next day is full. Morning comes, and routine breaks. Roberta Ragusa is not where she should be. First responders check the property. Doors and windows are noted. Nothing obvious signals a struggle that neighbors could hear. The perimeter is searched and cleared in expanding circles. Patrols drive the nearby roads. No match. Investigators build a simple grid: last confirmed contact, last time seen at home, first report of absence. They pull for signals that normally light up when a person moves: mobile activity, bank attempts, transit taps, surveillance hits. There is silence. Phones don't register movement. Credit and debit cards do not wake up. No fuel purchase. No CCTV still that can be verified as Roberta leaving. When a life leaves no digital after trail, the default assumption is not explanation, it is risk. The household timeline is tightened to minutes. Who slept? Who woke? Who first realized she was missing? Who called whom next? The grid is conservative, speculations are kept out. Only what is certain is kept in. Statements are taken and logged, phrasing and time references are preserved. The frame of the case is now set: a missing person event with no confirmed exit path, no life signal rebound, and no body. Search command expands to fields, ditches, waterways, rail margins, and known footpaths. Community volunteers join formal units. Tips rise and fall. False positives are documented and closed. The file grows by negative evidence, what should exist and does not. In U.S.-style case work, this is called absence analysis. It is not dramatic. It is decisive. A witness line emerges later, a night shift observation near the window that matters. The account is tested for consistency, lighting conditions, and vantage. It does not close the case. It anchors time. Separately, investigators begin to map relationship stressors around the home: work strain, family load, recent tensions. This is victimology, not gossip. It allows risk scoring when forensics are thin. The case direction is now procedural. Build the clock. Cross-check statements against the clock. Compare statements to what devices and infrastructure can prove. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. This series will proceed like a field report: timeline first, then witness evaluation, then behavior evidence, then the courtroom mosaic that explains how a conviction can stand without a body. No dramatics. No invented scenes. Every chapter adds a new forensic layer and moves forward. The file opens on time. Night turns into morning between January 13th and 14th, 2012, in Jello, San Giuliano Terme, Pisa. By routine, Roberta Ragusa should be preparing for the next day's obligations. Instead, absence is the first anomaly. Patrol units check the residence and immediate perimeter. Doors and windows are inspected and photographed. Nothing suggests forced entry that neighbors could have heard. The house is ordinary, the silence is not. Investigators build a clock. Last verified presence at home. First moment someone notices she is not where she should be. First outbound contact to ask if anyone has seen her. Each minute is fixed with a source: a call record, a neighbor recollection, a written note on a schedule, a patrol log. The approach is conservative. Only what can be confirmed stays in. Assumptions are held back. The objective is to narrow the window in which she could have left or been removed. Digital checks start immediately. Her phone is queried for movement, tower to tower. Nothing indicates travel after midnight. Messaging is quiet. There are no card swipes, no ATM attempts, no transit taps, no fuel receipt that belongs to her. This is not just unlucky, it is diagnostic. When a person departs voluntarily, traces follow. Here, the infrastructure stays dark. The absence of legitimate life signals increases the weight of risk. Search management expands outward. Officers and volunteers walk verges, drainage lines, field margins, and access roads. Crews check ditches, culverts, and rail edges. Canine teams work sent in conditions that are less than ideal. Any sighting claim is documented, routed to verification, and either linked to the clock or set aside. Leads fall off quickly when placed against the grid. The early hours matter because that is when real accidents, if they occurred, should still leave something to find. Nothing reliable turns up. Inside the household timeline, statements are taken with attention to phrasing and time language, about, around, I think, I remember. Vague terms are pinned to objects, alarm times, TV programming, receipts, and caller ID. Where accounts intersect with the physical environment, they are tested. Could a person have left unseen by a neighbor with a line of sight? Would an opening door have triggered a noise a light sleeper would report? Those answers are recorded, not guessed. Lighting conditions in the street and on the property are documented. If a vehicle came or went, what would a pedestrian on the nearby route reasonably perceive? Which angles are blind? Which corners are covered by private cameras that do not capture public walkways but might catch a light flare, a reflection, a passing shadow? Local systems are canvassed. Footage that exists is timestamped and preserved when relevant. Most of it does not help. None of it shows a clean exit for Roberta. The first credible outside observation arrives later in the week. A night shift witness notes a vehicle presence near the interval that matters. The account is not treated as a conclusion. It is treated as a point on the clock. Investigators test it against the environment, distance, lamppost wattage, angle, and the witness's reason to remember that specific night. The statement will be rechecked for consistency again, because reliability rises or falls with repetition under pressure. For now, it tightens the window. Parallel to field work, victimology is kept simple and relevant. Roberta's schedule, responsibilities, and current stressors are mapped because they affect risk. There is no effort to dramatize routine. The purpose is to identify whether a voluntary departure is probable and whether known pressures could have prompted abrupt change. Her obligations remain on the calendar, unfulfilled. That weighs toward concern rather than choice. By the end of hour 72, the shape of the case is clear. No forced entry to explain a sudden struggle heard by neighbors. No digital trail that fits a self-directed trip. No authenticated sightings that place her alive and moving after the clock closes. The file is still formally a missing person case, but the working posture adjusts. If a crime occurred, it likely began inside a narrow span of time and very close to home. In small towns, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. What the audience needs to know now is straightforward. When forensics are limited, time is evidence. The grid becomes the spine of everything that follows: witness evaluation, behavior analysis, and later, courtroom arguments. Each new piece will be tested against this clock. If it fits, it stays. If it does not, it fails. The third line of this file is not a lab result or a footprint. It's a person who says he saw something when the town was asleep. In the week after January 14, 2012, investigators document a night shift resident who reports a vehicle presence within the window already fixed by the timeline. His name is logged, his location placed on a map, and his vantage line drawn against the street grid. The goal is simple: determine whether one human observation can narrow the clock without overpromising what a memory can deliver. The first interview is taken on record. Time language is pinned to verifiable anchors: shift start and end, meal break, a clock visible from his position, ambient sounds at the hour he describes. Investigators ask what drew his attention: engine noise, headlight pattern, an unusual stop, a turn that made no sense for normal traffic. He states why he remembers this particular night and not a similar one. That reason is written down. Confidence is rated, not guessed. The statement is not a conclusion, it's a coordinate. Conditions are tested. Officers revisit the location at comparable hours to check lighting and sight lines. They measure distances with a wheel, not a guess. Where a lamppost throws a pool of light, they note the exact reach. Where hedges or parked vehicles cut the view, they mark the blind spots. If the witness claims a partial plate or a vehicle class, the team asks how that conclusion was reached: by badge, by silhouette, by sound. If he only saw color and shape, the report says so. Precision matters more than drama. The second interview is scheduled without telegraphing contradictions. The same core questions are asked in a different order. The witness is not pushed toward agreement, he is given room to correct himself. Investigators listen for the small errors healthy memory makes and the large shifts rehearsed stories often produce. Details that hold under pressure are tagged. Details that drift are not discarded, they're labeled for weight adjustment. The product is not a perfect tale. It's a reliability score. Next comes environmental corroboration. Patrol logs and private security cameras within a reasonable radius are checked for headlight sweeps, reflections on windows, and passing shadow bands at the noted minute. Even if the vehicle itself is outside a camera's field, light can fall where a lens can see it. A negative check is evidence too. It tells the team where the claimed path probably did not run. Any audio sensor or motion-activated light is cross-referenced with timestamps. Most produce nothing decisive. Some confirm that a vehicle, at a plausible time, moved where the witness says it did. The witness's line is now placed over the household clock built in the prior chapter. If the account is genuine, does it shorten the window, or does it push the window later than devices and statements allow? If it conflicts, which source is more stable, a cell tower histogram or a human eye in low light? The team doesn't choose by preference, it chooses by measurable error rates. Under this method, the account helps, but only within the error bars of night sight at distance. A third interview is set after the environment review. The witness is not told which parts matched equipment and which did not. He is asked to walk the path, stand where he says he stood, point to the angle of approach, and repeat what he believed the vehicle did. Investigators record pauses and corrections. If he now adds a detail he did not mention before, the transcript notes the addition and its origin, remembered spontaneously, or prompted by a new question. Consistency is recorded as a number and a short narrative, not a feeling. Why does this matter? Because in a case with no body and a silent device trail, people become censors. Censors have tolerances. Courts will ask for those tolerances later. A strong eyewitness account can anchor a timeline, it cannot replace one. The file keeps those boundaries clear. You will not hear us say a witness solved the case. You will hear us show what his observation did to the window: it tightened it, and it bent it toward a route that passes very near the home. There is also the human side. The person who stands in the street and says, "I saw something," will be asked the same thing many times. He will hear the town's theories and carry the weight of being early and alone. We document that pressure without grading it. The rule is simple: respect the citizen, test the statement. In communities like this, cooperation is a resource. It should be met with clarity, not theatrics. By the end of this segment, the evidence gain is specific. The window for a non-voluntary event is shorter. A plausible vehicle movement exists inside that window. The path is consistent with a departure from the immediate area. None of that proves a homicide. All of it shapes what comes next: behavior evidence from people closest to the household and how their actions, before and after the disappearance, either align with innocent explanation or do not. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. We've built the window and tested the witness. Now we look at the person at the center of the file, because in a nobody case, risk assessment starts with who the missing party is and what pressures were in play when the clock closed. Roberta Ragusa was a known local businesswoman in Jello, San Giuliano Terme, Pisa. Her days were scheduled: family duties, work responsibilities, community contact. Investigators mapped that routine, not to tell a life story, but to ask one practical question: given her obligations, is voluntary disappearance likely? The schedule immediately following the night in question remained full and unmet. Standing commitments didn't pause. That contrast matters. People who plan to leave usually leave signals, arrangements, warnings, withdrawals, or at least a break in routine that makes sense. Here, the pattern stops mid-stride. The team conducts standard victimology, recent medical issues, mental health flags, addiction concerns, legal disputes, financial stress. Nothing documented at this early stage indicates a crisis that would support a self-directed vanishing. They examine social connections, friends, co-workers, family, looking for someone who might have been asked to keep a secret departure. Interviews don't surface a confidant with credible knowledge of an exit plan. The working posture shifts: the less support for voluntary absence, the more weight assigned to non-voluntary scenarios. Next, the file records household dynamics relevant to risk. Investigators take statements about recent conflict, sleeping arrangements, and day-to-day friction points. This isn't gossip, it's triage. When partners are in prolonged strain, danger can rise around breaks in routine. Interview notes reflect that tension existed in the relationship before the disappearance. That observation is not used to assign blame, it's entered to refine risk. Safety isn't just about locks, it's about patterns. The question of secret travel gets tested with the pieces available. At this stage, there is no documented ticket purchase tied to Roberta, no confirmed lodging reservation, and no verified long-distance transport booked in her name for the morning after. Cash flight is considered. Investigators look for large withdrawals, transfers, or debt activity that would fund a new start. None is confirmed in the record for that window. The practical read is simple: abrupt, unresourced disappearances without prior warning are uncommon for stable caregivers with next-day obligations. Friends and colleagues contribute context. They describe a person engaged in daily life, not someone trial ballooning an exit. Again, this isn't character testimony for court, it's probability work for the search. The more integrated the daily web, children, customers, scheduled tasks, the more conspicuous a sudden no-show becomes. That conspicuousness is exactly what triggered the morning concern and the immediate checks we've already covered. Investigators also ask whether there were preparations for a temporary break: suitcase laid out, clothing missing, a note, a handoff plan for responsibilities. The file at this point does not authenticate any of those indicators. If anything, the absence of planning artifacts narrows attention back toward the narrow interval we built in chapters 1 and 2. Voluntary departures leave logistical fingerprints. This window does not. A distinct part of victimology is mapping threats, perceived or reported. Did Roberta voice fear to anyone in the days prior? Did she request changes at home, new locks, an alarm code reset, a shift in routines? The record includes references to relationship strain but no verified protective steps initiated by her in the immediate run-up. That gap doesn't prove safety, it shows there wasn't an active protection plan the team could build around. In cases like this, families need clear systems to escalate concerns early. It's not moralizing, it's logistics that save time when minutes matter. Because the device trail remained silent, investigators rely more heavily on human accounts around the household: who spoke with Roberta last, what exact words were used, whether stress had escalated or de-escalated in the week before. Small, verifiable facts, appointments set, messages promised, errands scheduled, become anchors. When those anchors are consistent with a person planning to continue tomorrow as normal, analysts assign a lower probability to impulsive flight. One more layer belongs here: external pressures. Business responsibilities can generate strain that sometimes triggers withdrawal. Team members check for disputes, looming audits, or crises that would make someone disappear to avoid consequences. Nothing in the documented record for that time frame identifies an external fire severe enough to support that theory. The simplest read remains, ordinary obligations, abruptly abandoned, inside a narrow time window. So what does this chapter add, in concrete terms? It converts personal details into risk weighting. It removes voluntary getaway from the top of the list and puts non-voluntary absence into sharper focus, not as a conclusion, but as the more probable scenario when balanced against routine, obligations, and known stressors. It also sets up where the investigation goes next, examining the actions of people closest to the home before and after the night, and asking whether those actions align with an innocent explanation or signal awareness of something more serious. In towns like this, a disappearance isn't background noise, it changes how everyone moves. Our job is to keep the analysis human and disciplined at the same time. With the window set and a vetted witness tightening it, the next question is behavioral. What did the adults nearest to Roberta do before, during, and after the hours when she disappeared? In cases without a body, actions often say more than theories. Investigators moved from where she wasn't to what others did. They began with communications. The team reviewed call patterns, messaging habits, and how devices were handled once the absence became public. The point wasn't to read feelings out of texts, it was to see whether anyone behaved like a person who knew more than the searchers. When people panic honestly, they reach outward in messy, redundant ways, friends, neighbors, repeated calls to the same contact. When people are controlled and selective, that can be natural temperament. It can also reflect prior knowledge. Every phone choice was compared to the minute-based interval we built earlier. Attention turned to a relationship that had already surfaced in the record, a long-running, private connection between the husband and a woman in the family's orbit. Investigators documented testimony that phones used for that communication were to be destroyed, and where they were allegedly discarded. The devices themselves didn't yield a trove of recovered data, the act of disposal mattered. In criminal files, destroying a channel is rarely about privacy after a spouse goes missing, it's about closing a path to reconstruction. The timeline question was simple: when were those instructions given relative to the disappearance, and how did that timing line up with public statements of shock, worry, and confusion? Consistency checks followed. Statements about movements that night and early morning were measured against the environment, lighting, line of sight, and that single witness route that bends back toward the house. Even minor conflicts in time language, about midnight versus closer to 1, were held against objective anchors like device checks and routine cues. The file did not need a confession, it needed a pattern. If someone knew the window intimately, their later choices often show it. Investigators then looked at cascading behavior after the missing person report. Who initiated searches, who led, who hung back? Who volunteered records without request, and who provided them only after formal demand? People under legitimate stress can look awkward, that's not a crime. But there are actions that raise flags, selective cooperation, rehearsed answers, and sudden interest in alibis that only make sense after the public timeline is known. Those are not personality quirks, they are signals to be weighed. The household footprint was read with the same discipline. Was anything cleaned, rearranged, or removed in a way that undermined the ability to reconstruct the night? Without a body, forensic yield is thin, so what stays or vanishes inside the structure takes on weight. If a story places someone away from the property at a key moment, the property should agree: lights, vehicles, neighbors. Where the property and the story diverged, the divergence was not labeled as guilt, it was labeled as friction to be resolved. Friction accumulates. Back on communications, investigators differentiated between normal phone gaps and engineered silence. It's normal to miss a text, it's abnormal to deactivate or jettison devices that connect two people whose contact will become central the minute a spouse disappears. The record reflected testimony about discarding phones used for private conversations between the husband and the other woman. That didn't prove a homicide, it proved a consciousness that those devices could talk long after their owners stopped speaking. Context mattered too. Friends told police that Roberta was plugged into the rhythms of work and family. That makes surprise departures rarer without notice. When the person beside such a routine rings no credible alarms before the morning she's reported gone, and yet moves quickly to limit communications after, investigators don't assign motive from thin air. They mark a mismatch, public uncertainty paired with private control over what the past can reveal. There was also the issue of narrative drift. Early explanations tend to be clumsy and honest. As days go on, stories can calcify. Analysts compare first statements to later ones, word by word, especially around the verified interval. The more a story reshapes itself to fit the wintertide timeline, the less it reads like memory and the more it reads like accommodation. Courts do not require a camera shot to accept that shift, they require a rational chain that connects behavior to knowledge. For the audience, here's the core: no body prosecutions survive not on spectacle but on the sum of independent parts. In this file, behavior evidence didn't scream. It stacked. A private relationship. Device channels allegedly destroyed. Statements that adjusted around a hard clock. Public posture that didn't track perfectly with private steps to limit exposure. Each item is modest. Together, they begin to act like gravity. This is also where the human factor earns a moment. People grieve differently, but truth has a rhythm. When a loved one is missing, you widen the circle, not shrink it. You open records, not close them. You accept short-term embarrassment to speed the long-term answer. In towns like this, families deserve that urgency. The job of an investigator isn't to punish oddness, it's to note which choices serve the search and which choices serve the storyteller. So, as we leave this segment, the case posture tightens again. Voluntary departure is downgraded by routine, accident is undercut by the clean perimeter and the quiet infrastructure, and behavior around the disappearance begins to look less like confusion and more like management. Proof? Not yet. Direction? Absolutely. The next move is procedural, how a 2015 legal turn briefly slackened the case, then sent it back into court with instructions to weigh this mosaic properly. By early 2015, the investigation had a tightened interval, a vetted witness, and a growing stack of behavior findings, but none of it had yet been weighed by a trial court. In March, a preliminary judge reviewed the file and ruled that the husband would not stand trial. That decision did not say the disappearance was solved, it said the existing record, as presented, didn't cross the legal threshold to proceed. In no-body cases, preliminary screenings can be a stress test. Do the strands look like coincidence, or do they already cohere? Here, at first pass, coincidence won. The prosecution petitioned Italy's Supreme Court, cassation. The ask was narrow and technical: re-examine whether the lower court had applied the correct legal standard to circumstantial evidence in a missing spouse case. Cassation does not reinvestigate facts, it reviews how law was used to judge those facts. The question was whether the judge who declined to send the husband to trial had discounted mutually reinforcing strands, timeline, witness placement, device handling, post-event conduct, by evaluating each piece in isolation instead of as a mosaic. When cassation annulled the cleared outcome later that year, it wasn't a dramatic twist, it was a procedural correction. The High Court's position, boiled down: if independent strands point in the same direction, the law allows them to be weighed together by a trial panel. That sent the file back with instructions: hold a full trial, take the testimony, and evaluate the entire pattern under the standard for circumstantial proof. For families, this kind of ruling is both technical and human. It doesn't promise a conviction. It guarantees the case will be heard. Investigators adjusted posture. A remand doesn't create new evidence, it demands sharper presentation of what exists. The team resequenced witnesses so the time window came first, followed by the environmental checks that underpinned the night shift account, then the behavior stack, relationship context, phone disposal testimony, and narrative drift measured against the verified interval. The order matters. When jurists hear the clock before they hear the conduct is understood as a response to time, not a story in search of facts. Defense counsel prepared on a different axis, challenge memory tolerances, question lighting and vantage, and frame the device disposal testimony as personal privacy rather than consciousness of guilt. That approach is standard. In a no-body file, the aim is to pry apart the mosaic and argue that what looks like alignment is simply life's messiness. The state's task is the inverse: show that independent pieces, gathered from different sources, agree beyond reasonable doubt when viewed together. If you're following along closely, notice what didn't change here. There was no new scene. No discovery of remains. No surprise confession. The procedural turn did not add spectacle, it clarified the rules. For this case, that clarity was decisive. Once the matter returned for trial, the panel would be allowed to accept a convergence of 1. A narrow, verified interval, 2. A credible vehicle presence within it, 3. Behavior around communications that signaled the closing of channels, and 4. Statements that shifted toward the hard clock rather than fixed the clock independently. There's a practical takeaway for viewers who care about how these files work. Appellate courts in no-body cases often focus on discipline, not drama. They ask, did the lower court weigh the whole pattern? If the answer is no, they send it back. In towns like this, that decision carries weight beyond a docket. It tells a community that the silence around a missing mother deserves a full hearing, not a shortcut. As preparations for trial advanced, the narrative risks we manage on this channel stayed front of mind. One story, one ending. No invented scenes. No sudden found evidence that doesn't exist in the record. The file remained what it had been since January 2012, a disappearance with no verified departure, no recovered remains, and a growing, testable pattern of conduct. The next step would be the first full adjudication of that pattern. When the case finally reached a trial panel in Pisa in late 2016, the file was not built on a single dramatic exhibit. It was built the way many no-body cases are, piece by piece, from independent sources that point the same way. The court was asked to decide whether those pieces, time, citing, conduct, and silence, formed a pattern strong enough to meet the criminal standard. Prosecutors started with the verified interval. They walked the judges through the minute window we've already built: last reliable presence at home, the first confirmed absence, and the quiet infrastructure that followed. Phone activity from Roberta did not resume. Banking stayed dormant. Travel indicators failed to appear. That was not presented as a conclusion by itself, it was the baseline against which all other evidence would be tested. They then placed the night shift witness inside that interval. His account had been measured for distance, lighting, and consistency across interviews. The court heard why his observation had value and what its limits were. The judges were not asked to treat him as a camera, they were asked to treat him as a corroborated point that compresses time and bends a plausible route toward the household. From there, the panel heard behavior evidence. The relationship outside the marriage was corroborated through testimony, and the instruction to dispose of phones used for that communication was documented. The devices themselves did not produce a forensic jackpot, the conduct around them did. The question for the court was narrow: does destroying a communication channel after a spouse vanishes look like ordinary privacy, or does it signal awareness that those devices could reconstruct what happened before the disappearance? Framed against the silent baseline, the latter read more likely. Statements were compared next. Early explanations were set beside later ones. Where language shifted to better match the hard clock, the court noted the drift. No judge expects perfect recall, they do expect stability where memory is supposed to be independent of later publicity. The more a version of events seemed to learn from the investigation rather than anticipate it, the less weight it carried. None of these strands, on its own, could have proven a homicide beyond a reasonable doubt. Together, they were presented as a mosaic: a narrow time frame, a credible vehicle presence inside it, post-event conduct that closed channels rather than opened them, and narrative shifts leaning toward the known timeline. The legal test was not whether each piece excluded every innocent explanation in isolation, but whether the pieces, in combination, reasonably excluded them. Defense counsel did what they were supposed to do. They pressed the witness on vantage and memory. They argued that private communications are not crimes, and that discomfort or imperfect phrasing after a traumatic event does not equal guilt. The court's task was to decide whether those criticisms broke the pattern, or merely questioned it. In December 2016, the judges issued their decision, guilty of murder and destruction/concealment of a body, with a 20-year sentence. Custody of the children was removed. The ruling made explicit what this series has kept clear from the first episode: there was no recovered body. The absence of remains did not collapse the case because the court accepted that independent, mutually reinforcing strands can meet the standard when viewed together, and that post-event behavior can carry probative weight when it aligns with a silent baseline. For families and communities, verdicts like this are not celebrations, they are closures of a legal question. The human question, where is Roberta, remained unanswered. That tension sits at the center of no-body cases. Law can reach a conclusion without recovering the person. The record here did. The appellate path in Italy didn't add drama, it checked the work. In 2018, the Florence Court of Appeals reviewed the same record that produced the 2016 verdict: a verified night window, a vetted vehicle observation inside it, documented disposal of phones tied to an outside relationship, and statements that shifted toward the fixed interval. The court found the reasoning sound and confirmed the 20-year sentence. Defense counsel took the final step. In July 2019, Italy's Supreme Court, Cassazione, upheld the conviction. Cassation doesn't retry facts, it tests whether law was applied correctly. Its answer was clear: independent strands can be weighed together in a no-body case when each strand is lawfully obtained and consistent. No new scene, no confession, no remains, just a final judgment that the pattern met the standard. That is where the legal story ends. The human story is harder. Roberta Ragusa has never been found. San Giuliano term carried on, but a blank space remained where a mother, a daughter, a colleague used to be. In real investigations, closure isn't a feeling, it's a court record. The law can say this is what happened without telling a family this is where she is. Both truths can exist at once. There's a quiet lesson worth keeping. Time is evidence. Early, disciplined timelines prevent confusion years later. Behavior matters when it lines up with silence, closing channels after a disappearance carries weight. And stability in statements counts, versions that learn from the investigation lose force. None of that replaces forensics, it explains how cases move when forensics are thin. I'll leave you with this: timelines, small facts, and the courage to speak up can save lives. Roberta's case taught me that silence can look tidy, but truth needs neighbors who keep notes and ask hard questions. If your gut says a routine is broken, act, document, call, check in. That's how communities protect their own. What mattered most here, the clock, the witness, or the choices made after she vanished? Tell me in the comments and share where you're watching from. If this story moved you, or if it didn't, say why. And if you found value, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next case.